Oh, it just, my stream is somehow just not working. I hope it's working now. We'll see. All right, let's see what's going on. Hi, Melody, good to see you. Okay, I'm just gonna move this over to here because it's my little talisman now. I like it. All right. Hi, just saying hi to everybody, letting people jump in. Sheena, good to see you. Okay. Oh, lost in translation. I know I'm seeing some people. Aloha, humanimal. And there you are, Lori, I'm here. Hi. Dot, good to see you. Olivia, Susan. Yeah, this thing I got, it's kind of cool. I ordered it on, what do you call it, Cafe Press or something, and I put the card on it, and I just thought it was so pretty. So hi, guys. So I did that. And I have an entire store now up on Zazzle, by the way, you guys. I don't know what's going on. I'm just getting like across my face, but hey, Les, good to see you. Anybody here for the first time? Anybody a new subscriber? Please let me know. I just want to welcome you. Just take a moment to welcome some new folks. Let's see. Okay, good. Oh, thanks, yeah. Oh, okay. I was going to say, well, welcome, Johanna. Good to see you. Welcome, Les. Yes, of course. Oh, yeah, Humanimal's okay, Jess. She just jumped in on Bundy before I had a chance to. Paige, good to see you. Good, thanks, Dot. Giving people a second. Oh, Melody Maine. Oh, I love Maine. Good to see you. Rudy, good to see you. Okay, good. Good to see some folks. Hey, thanks, Lost in Translation. Eastinger, Joanne. Oh, Joanne, thank you. Yeah, my chakra wisdom or oracle cards. You mean the tarot cards? Because I've got this deck, and I've got the oracle deck as well. So I thought I would just start because one of the things that's been happening for me lately is, and I'll look over there in a minute, I wanted to just start with Ted Bundy because I was really thinking lately about him and about how the having just gone through the experience we all did in the past year with the Watts case and really looking at Bundy again. I think what happened was people were talking about it, and I know there was a special on TV, and I lived through it. So I remember it, and I remember how disjointed it was and how there were these crimes up in Washington, and then there were crimes in Colorado, and then, so where I want to start is I want to start with his birth. Of course, most of you know already that there was, and I'm just going to rattle it off because Bundy was in fact a Scorpio, and at some point I'll pull his chart. I haven't yet. Actually, he was a Sag because he was right into Sagittarius. He was born on November 24th, 1946, and he was actually considered a serial killer and a necrophile. And so one of the things that I want to mention before I really get into all that is that, here I go, yawning, the idea that his mother, and this is still a rumor, but more I look into it, the more it feels true to me. The rumor was that his grandfather was his father, and that his mother, who was sent to Vermont to a home for unwed mothers, in those days that was like very taboo, and she then went back to her parents' home. Now, my thinking is, and this has been rumored for a long time, that Bundy's mother was known as his sister, and there's a lot of different ideas around that, but I'm going to share with you, kind of my cut through idea of what I sensed, because a lot of the facts are very skewed in some ways. So let's go to his birth in Vermont, and almost immediately on the birth certificate, it said that his father was just a man that had abandoned her, and he was some kind of Army veteran, and that was, that was just this presupposition. However, and I couldn't find them to show you right now, and I'm not as savvy with some of the internet stuff, but there is actually a picture of his grandfather, and Bundy is the spitting image. So I really do believe that his grandfather was his father. Hold on 1 second. Scott, oh, good to see you. Hi, Tori. Thanks for your talk about your ADD experiences. Fellow, a lot to hear someone's experience. I'm excited for your thoughts on Bundy. Thank you, Scott, and thank you for the super chat. Appreciate it. So Bundy, and I'll that's another, I'm going to talk about my journey with ADHD in a bit, but so Bundy was born to his mother, who, when she returned to her father and mother's home, it's important to say that her mother was mentally ill and had agoraphobia. She was also very, very nervous, very scared. The father, Louise, who was Bundy's grandmother. Okay. Here's the thing. Can you guys see me? Yeah. Okay, good. So yeah, he looked like his grandfather. I mean, so much so that it was like, you guys, if that man didn't father that child, I don't know who did. His grandfather was extremely violent, extremely dangerous. He beat the grandmother regularly. It is completely within believability that he raped his own daughter. And the daughter, this is to show you, the daughter takes her child back to live with her parents. And they decide, in those days it was too taboo, so they decided that they were going to raise him as theirs. Now, here's this violent, crazy guy. Now, and by the way, the grandfather would take cats by the tail and swing them and throw them. This was part of the grandfather's makeup. And it was later said that the grandfather, Ted's father, it's like my father, my grandfather, it's kind of like that. And I think that it is the fact that that man was so violent, and he was the only male role model. Now, Ted, from a very young age, thought that his mother was his sister. And my suspicion on this is because from the time he was born until he was, I want to say he was 5 when his mother actually moved away and took him. And she went to, forgive me, I think it was Washington State. Or was it Seattle? It was one of the two where she left and took him. Now, here's the irony of this. She moved away from her parents. Now, Ted was 5 when she did that. It was later believed that Ted was only 3 or 4 when she took him, but Ted's damage had already been done. Her sister, Ted's mother's sister, which would have been his believed other sister, right, said that one day she woke up and Ted, who was only 3 and looking at her like with this, the eyes he has at 3 years old, was standing at the edge of the bed and had placed knives all around her. So this was something also that people really didn't talk about in those days. It was like, what do you do with a 3-year-old that's showing signs of violence? And he really admired the grandfather. In fact, some of the things, his grandfather was completely hateful. He hated every race, he hated every religion, and Ted really emulated his grandfather. He also would source out his grandfather's pornography collection. Now, if he was young and looking at his grandfather's pornography, he had to be 3 years old. He didn't live with the grandparents again. So when he was talking, later in life after he got caught, he was saying that it was his grandfather who influenced him with the pornography, because he would sneak off and try to look at the pornography all the time. Later in his teen years and even preteen years, when he moved with his mother, he would go into garbage cans all around the city and look for pornography. Now, we've heard this before. He was trying to blame everything on porn, right? I don't know. I think that can be one aspect, but I think that there's so many of us that have different, if you will, illnesses or conditions, but we don't do stuff like that. I've known guys who had a huge porn addiction and they had to work on it. And ultimately, it's kind of like being an alcoholic. You don't get over it. You just learn how to deal with it in a sense and get sober, so to speak. But, the thing is that was a big part of Ted Bundy's life. So a couple things that are important about this. And when I was really vibing on it, I was thinking about really, we blame the mother, but, I really want to look at the family dynamic here. I'm going to back up for a minute, and I want you to look at this with me. If you're willing to look at the fact that Ted's grandfather, who he idolized, was also his father. Now, at 3 years old, he was taken from the only father he never ever really knew, who was apparently quite the dashing guy. I mean, he was also a bit of a thug. And so from what we can gather around Ted's father or grandfather was that he beat guys up. He was quite the snappy dresser. So Ted really admired that superior controlled position. However, now you take this boy who maybe, I'm going to guess, between 3 and 5, and anybody who's into psychology, I mean, you can this is like 101, right? That children are pretty much formed by the time they're 5. So who they're I want to say associated with, or the trauma before 5, is really an imprint on their life. So witnessing how his grandfather beat his grandmother, beat his mother, tortured animals. There's also a story about when Ted lived with his mother after she married Bundy. Bundy was a guy she met who was a cook. He was basically a short order cook, and she met him and married him, and he adopted Ted. Ted always resented him. He said he was beneath them. He felt that his father was just this. His adopted father was this loser. Now, during that time, one of the neighbors actually reported that she remembered the day Ted Bundy strung a cat on a clothesline and set it on fire. And they could hear the cat screaming all over the neighborhood. And by the time they got to the cat, it was dead. So this is the kind of behavior that we all, it's become classic now that this is, a serial killer in the making stuff. But, we didn't know some of that at the time. And one of the things that really shocked Ted in later life, and he said this, was that he was surprised that anybody recognized him at all, because he felt that people didn't really look at each other. And they didn't know who each other were. And I think that a lot of his lessons really came from the father. Now, I don't really have, and there really is not a lot of information about the mother recontacting her parents. And I think that once she married, I think it was Johnny Bundy was his name. Once she married him, their life just went in a different direction. But Ted's damage had already been done. And Ted already had been fed a lot of that, I think, sociopathic, psychopathic, and believe, now I'm using the term, okay? And, you know, I think some of you've watched this, but I just watched a moment. Yeah, I was watching it because I really got into this case again because it all came back to me. There was a moment when Ted, at the end of his life, he was about to be electrocuted, and somebody came in and said, "Are you sorry for what you did?" And it was just uncanny how the process in his brain. I mean, you could almost see him, well, I really love God, and I've come to know God. And it was just, but as he started to talk, you started to believe him. I mean, it is really incredible how, and I hadn't really seen this before, you know, and I mentioned this when I was talking about early in the Chris Watts case, and so many people were like, you know, furious at me because I said, well, he comes across as charming, but that is a symptom of that kind of ability to manipulate and be crazy and get away with things, right? But what Bundy said was, he said, I found God, and he didn't answer the question, which was very, do you feel bad? Do you feel sorry for the people? And finally, he said, I can understand that this inflicted pain on people, and I don't really know why I did it. And it's interesting because, you know, that seems to be and it was funny because he was trying to hide his deed, and he did the most disgusting things. Now, here's the thing about, and I think it's, let's see, Johanna said this because I just want to, hi, Miss Shelley. I don't find him charming. You know, I think the thing about it is that when you look at Ted Bundy, and even the law enforcement people were really saying this a lot. And when I read Mindhunter and some of those other books, I read Ann Rule's book, they all commented on when you knew Ted, he was so charming. And when we saw Ted and the things we saw about Ted Bundy, we were watching this crazy, wild-eyed, nutty, arrogant SOB, because he really was arrogant. I mean, when you watched him on TV, it's like, well, you know, it was like, what a monster, you know. However, all the people that had contact with him consistently said, oh, you know, he was just so charming, and you just would have no way of knowing. And even though he actually told a church group that he belonged to, he actually told the group, because they were saying, I don't know how this guy would get away with it. And they took the picture and they held it up against everybody in the room saying, not you, not you, the picture of the suspect. And they even held it up to Ted and said, nope, not you. And they said, well, I don't know how this guy gets away with it. And he said, well, it's pretty simple. You commit the murder in one state, you dispose of the body in another state, and then you get rid of the evidence in another state. And this one guy said, we didn't even take that to mean anything. And even when Ted was arrested, people who knew him were sending him, you know, cards saying, you know, we hope that you get over this. Yes, Ted Bundy does have a daughter. He married this woman who he knew from the suicide hotline. How funny is that? That's where he met Ann Rule. He had volunteered at the suicide hotline, and he met Ann Rule, and he also met the woman who he would marry while he was incarcerated, while he was in prison. And they both said that they had conjugal visits. So she got pregnant and she had his daughter. So, I mean, you know, it's just like, I'm trying to report this with a straight face, you guys, because it's like the times now let me once again roll back something that I think is very important. Oh, he did know how to schmooze. one of the things that I want to roll back here is let's look at the time period. You know, the 60s, right? We looked at the 60s, and I just did this thing about, it was funny, I did this little mini history of, nail polish. And one of the things we can look at is that in the early 60s, it was still very demure and elegant. By the time we got to the later 60s, it was like Hippieville. Nobody was wearing makeup. Nobody was wearing nail polish. And so the colors in makeup and in nail polish became very vibrant. They became very pronounced to attract young people who were ignoring it because women didn't have their hair done. They were washing it and letting it go. There were so many things that were happening in the late 60s. Woodstock, the protests against Vietnam. These were the things that were happening in that time period. And one of the other things that we really saw a lot of is competition between, and I want to say hierarchy in those days, between service branches of the government. And so you would have the FBI and the local police not respecting each other. You would have the state police and sheriffs being completely different, right? They're completely diametrically opposed to one another, because everyone in those days, it was more like you're a local guy. Think about this. A lot of these sheriffs, a lot of these people were local. So they wanted to look good to the community. So there was a lot at stake in looking good and making sure you closed the case. Now, nowadays, it's much more cooperative. It has grown a great deal. However, when we look at the local level in those days, it was a completely different time. Now, interestingly, there was a rumor that Ted had actually killed one of his neighbors, a little girl who had been abducted. He did not like this girl. She was found murdered in much the same way. And when he was, I want to say he was 14, and his mother and Bundy, I think they had separated at that time and they moved away from that neighborhood. But later on, that little girl's mother pleaded to Bundy and said, "Did you do this? I wanted to know," and he denied it. But, again, I don't think, because that's the one thing that I think I learned, if I will say, from following and listening and watching Chris Watts over the last year, is that they're not going to tell you the truth. There is no truth coming out of their mouth. And so I don't believe that he was innocent of that crime. I really do tend to think he did kill that little girl. That would have been his first actual murder that we kind of know of. Now let's move forward with Ted, because one of the things you want to look at, he was born in, think about this, he was born in 46. That means around 1960, 62, right? He is part of that decade that went from old school to hippy dippy. So if you think about it, he was in his formative years, he was raised with a grandfather who was extremely abusive, extremely narcissistic, and masochistic. I just made up a word. He was both of those. And for him, beating Ted, beating the women, abusing animals, I think that Ted really wanted that man's attention. And I really believe that there was a thing there about growing up and being better and being smarter than everybody else, because the grandfather called him an idiot and stupid, and Ted admired this man. So if you look at Ted at about 13 years old, as 1959, 1960, it was very conservative then. And all of a sudden it started to change. So here's Ted, right, in 1964, 18, right? So by the time, let's say 6 years from then, by the time he got to 1970, this is when, and they do believe that and this is about when he was 24, they do believe that he had, in fact, murdered in his 20s. He then went to several different law schools. One of the things that happened that a lot of law enforcement surmised, and I want to get back to the time period, but a lot of them surmised that he had been dating a gal, he fell in love with her, and she dumped him. And it was like unceremonious, and it was just fast. And she said, "You have no ambition. I'm done with you." And that's when he started to go to different law schools to prove that he was smart, and he couldn't stay in law school. It was just, he kept dropping out. So finally he gets this facade going, and he goes back to this girl who had dumped him, and he woos her again. And this time, because he's in law school and he's smart, she says, "Okay, I'll go out with you." And they dated, I think, for almost, I want to say almost 2 years, but it may not have been that long. But one day he asked her to marry him, and then he dumped her. And she was like trying to call him and said, "What happened? What, He said, "Oh, I just don't want you anymore." And he hung up, never talked to her again. And he later said he was getting back at her. And she said, "I think he was getting back at me." But because he wanted to prove that he could get her to marry him, but then not marry her. So there was that feeling of like, I don't have to marry to get what I want, which, was a real changing mentality during that time. So now we're at 1970, and remember what was going on. Now think about this. Nixon was elected in 1968. We were in the throes of the Vietnam War. There were protests on Washington. People, the hippie movement, they were only trusting each other. They weren't trusting law enforcement. They weren't trusting the fuzz or the man, right? So we really have to look at how the time period played into this particular crime in this particular time. And I think that the more we start looking at those feeds, if you will, that come in, we can start to see there was no cooperation. He was committing murders in one state and then the other. And, he figured out that cops weren't talking to each other, but he had definitely worked on outsmarting them. So when we look at, and think about this, Nixon resigned in 1974. Now, it was a very tumultuous time, and that's about the time that, and I want to say this because it's very interesting, because Ted also got very involved in some local political, very political, I want to say a local guy, like a local congressman, a local people running for office. And when those people lost, he just couldn't handle it. So there were things going on with him that were just, and by the way, he also said that he stole everything he had. In other words, he never really worked. I mean, I always think about this. And I know this is probably like, serial killer 101 for some of you, but I always wonder how they have the time. Like, I don't mean to make fun of a murder. I certainly don't. But I mean, how do it know? Like, do they have some serial killer antenna? Because I think there's this sick drive, and I think it becomes so focused that there's nothing else, and yet they can survive. I mean, they somehow pick up money somewhere. I mean, when we look at people like Dahmer, and I want to mention Jeffrey Dahmer, because he was in the next, if you will, the next decade, right, of serial killers. So when we look at how they're affected by the times and how we're affected by the times, the 60s were a very innocent time in some ways. And I think that the many men and women who went off to Vietnam, they were really believing in the country, and there was so much disillusionment. So we had two factions going at each other, and there was a lot of derisiveness. People believed two different things, and there was a lot of lack of respect. Sound familiar? The difference was then we really didn't have a we didn't have the communication we have today. We had to go to a payphone if we were calling anybody. There was no way of knowing, you only called people, and if you didn't get them, you just call them later. So one of the things that happened, which was really outrageous, I think, is that Ted Bundy was so escalated. He kidnapped this gal one night, all right? That night, when he kidnapped her, she actually was the first one, I think maybe one of the only ones that got away. And he pretended to be a police officer, told her her car was broken into. He used several disguises. He said that the cast worked for a while. The police officer with a badge worked for a while. He talked about being with how do you say, crutches, Now, the night that he kidnapped this gal, he said her car was broken into. They went to her car. She said nothing's been taken. He said, "Oh, the guy has been taken into custody. Would you come help us, identify him?" Well, that seemed odd to me, but she said yes. And so they went to the back of a closed donut shop. And she said that this was supposed to be the secret place where the police station was. Now, here's the thing, you guys. Would we fall for that today? No. So we can sit here and go, "Oh, that's kind of dumb." But you know what? This is where I did that other talk on we have to educate people, right? So anyway, they get to the back of this donut shop and the door's locked, of course. And he says, "Oh, they must have taken him down to the station. Why don't you come with me to the station?" Now, at that moment, she said she smelled booze on his breath. And she said, but she kind of felt like, and again, in those days, think about this. A cop was a cop. Many of us, I know for me, I would have just gone. Like, well, maybe not, but I don't, I can understand it is what I'm trying to say. I can understand his ruse. I can understand how women would have just trusted him. So the idea was that she got back to his car and she kind of felt like something was wrong, but she gets in anyway. And she said, because it was not a police car. And he said he worked undercover. He showed her his, what do you call it? The badge, right? And she said, well, I guess he's undercover. Okay. So they get in and all of a sudden they're driving, but he tries to put handcuffs on her. Okay. Now I'm missing up the little steps here, so bear with me, but he tries to put handcuffs on her. She recognizes right away, oh, no. She starts fighting him and she's going, we're not going toward the police station. Anyway, she got out. He stopped because he had to control her. She managed to get out and escape. And then she was running away, and he later said he was about to go after her, but another car was pulling up and helped her. So the handcuffs he used on her were later identified as the match to the other handcuffs that were, the marks were matched to the other handcuffs on the two women he killed that night. So not only did he do that, he then went back out and he was testifying himself. He was just talking, and he said he threw everything out the window as he was driving. And, again, in those days we had a lot more. Think about this. If you don't remember, it wasn't until the 70s when Smokey the Bear became really big, really. And we didn't have this kind of conversation on TV about trash on the side of the highways, littering, being a litter bug. This wasn't really prevalent. So there would be stuff on the side of the highway all the time. So when you look at it that way, you could start to see, oh, so he was just throwing things out like trash. And, this is the kind of stuff that, he would just throw things out and that's it. And nobody looked for it because nobody knew where to look. He also never used a gun, according to him, because he felt that would trace to him. He also left no fingerprints at any scene, which is, but these were the things he was really, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to see because I realized I haven't looked up at all and I'm kind of, okay. What is a thong girl? Are you Kyle? Hello? Hold on, let me, I'm just gonna just give me a little time out there. I don't know what that means. Okay. So yeah, give a hoot, don't pollute. Remember that? But that wasn't until, yeah. That's interesting. I wonder if that person ever did come forward. There was a time, I think I lost my, Jessica. Okay. I don't know if Jess is still here. I don't know if I have a moderator, so I'm going to have to kind of look a little bit. So one of the things that happened in that time as well is that oh my God, Sandra just put it, the Indian with the tear. Remember the tear is like polluting. And remember also that the things that we have to associate with particular crimes, when we look at them, I think that we can take it a little deeper when we look at it from the point of view. Gosh, it's warm in here. I'm so sorry. It's like, I turned on the air conditioning, but I'm still dying. But one of the things that that we have to really look at is the undercurrent of our society at the time. And we can say, is someone a product of their society? Is they the product of their upbringing? Are they a product of their environment? And I want to say all of it. I want to say that once Ted lost that particular girl, right, because he couldn't keep her, because he was a loser, he was a failure, he couldn't keep anything together. Think about it this way. From the time he was an infant, his grandfather told him he was a loser and he would never amount to anything. So being berated like that, Ted took that in and really tried to be meaner and worse than his grandfather. Think about it. He was trying to surpass the man who abused him. So when you really get that level of what was going on, you really have to take on the idea that by the time it really all went to exactly combo, when you really take everything into consideration, you begin to see the entire picture as, wow, give a hoot, don't pollute. All of those things, all of those campaigns, we didn't know litter was bad. I know that sounds crazy, but people would just leave trash at campsites. Well, they still do, but now we know it's bad. But they would just leave trash wherever they left it. So at the end of the day, it was always a great way to get rid of something. You just leave it with the trash. And it wasn't until, think about this, it wasn't until, I want to say, the mid-70s that people really tried to, and I want to say the cops were really looking in garbage at, and at garbage as ways to, I want to say, surveil. And that also became illegal too. Remember, that became personal property. But let's back up again, because I think, again, by the time Ted Bundy was committing these crimes, I really kind of started to think about this, that who was he killing and why was he killing? And he found out, it was understood at some level that he found out, at least Ann Rule said, he found out that his mother was his sister when he was in his 20s. That's when he went to Vermont and found the birth certificate. However, the birth certificate didn't name her father. The birth certificate said nothing on it. It had a fake name. So Ted was never able to find his father, because the truth is that the two different names that his mother claimed that these guys were never located. And later on, law enforcement did look for them. So these guys did not exist because it was her father that fathered her son. So you can begin again to get this fuller picture of Ted's rage at his mother. The only father he ever knew was his grandfather, who was his father. So not only does she take him away from the only parents he ever knew? She was only 24 when she did it. Think about this. So who was he killing? He was continually, I mean, he even said in one interview, he said, come on, who has a sister 20 years older? So he was even saying that, I believe, and this is just from my own intuitive kind of sense of it, and again, this is just the vibe I get, that I believe he was killing his mother out of rage for destroying what he saw as the only real escape he would ever have out of mediocrity. See, that grandfather, who was his father, was really someone who was extremely powerful to Ted. Ted looked up to him. He was everything Ted wasn't. You see, he was the symbol of power, the symbol of greatness. So his mother did the most heinous thing. Not only did she, check this out, seduce her own father, which Ted had to be in a rage about when he found out. Because this woman, who was his mother, slept with her own father. Now let's start to look at how that twists a young man's brain. Start thinking about that. So was she seductive to him? We don't know. We do know, though, that she sat there every day in the court through the trial. She claimed, even after he died, that Ted didn't do this. Ted could not have done. My Ted would never have done this. So, here's the thing. Even the most crazy mothers, okay, at some point kind of go, well, I guess he did it. I mean, like, even if they don't come out and say it, she was like adamantly saying there's no way he did this. I can only think of the sick relationship that she had formed with her son. Now, we know from Ted that he was having sex with body parts. He kept some of their heads and did some bad things, or things I don't want to mention. He also, there were a couple women he brought back to his apartment and kept for a few days. So he was not, this is not a nice guy, but this is a guy who had such a drive to kill that it was really, we know it's insane, right? Can we just say it's insane? And I know a lot of this, and I know we've talked about this on other things, but a lot of psychiatrists, complete incest. Are you kidding? Like, this is just, but if we look at it this way, there is a complete workup on Ted Bundy that if you talk to a different psychiatrist or psychologist or therapist, they're all going to say something different, but they're all going to make the same points, okay? Which is that bipolar, sociopathic, everything under the sun. And the thing that I can really see, and I want to share this with you because I only say it because my own father, he wasn't, there's nothing like that, but my own father actually his father died before he was born. So my grandmother was pregnant with my dad, and 3 months before he was born, his father died. So he never met his dad. She was in such grief. She put my father in a foster home, and this is an infant. In those days, back in the 20s, they wanted babies. So this very, very, very wealthy family adopted him, right? And took him in, and he lived with servants and all of these beautiful things. Well, by the time he was 3, my grandmother would go visit him, and one day she went in and she heard him call the lady of the house mom, and she became enraged and took him out of the house and put him back in the orphanage. And my dad always said to me that he had vague recollections of that home and how beautiful it was and how much he really loved living there. And he hated his mother. He hated her so much for doing that to him. And it wasn't until her deathbed that he went to see her and he understood, and they had a coming together talk, But the reason I say this is a rage, right? That's a rage that really, that carried him through his whole life. Now, Ted, think about how the compound here, he not only finds out, not only is he pulled from the only family he knows as his parents by this woman who says she's his sister, he finds out that his sister had sex with her father, who's really his father. So you can begin to see the insanity of all of this going on. Oh, Humanimal, thank you so much for the super chat. I appreciate you. I know it's the other side of the world there. So thank you so much. Appreciate you. So yeah, you know, my dad's upbringing was sad, and there's a lot of things that happened with my father that were very challenging that he and I had to work through. Things like he had such a money issue. And I'm going to do some stuff on money, I think, because I think that working through that is huge. And it was a 7-day intensive, right? You guys are going to love the story. I did a 7-day intensive, and it was free. You had to show up every morning at 8 a.m. and you could listen to it free. So it was 7 days in a row, 7 chakra, and I built on each one to teach about money manifesting, right? And it worked for the people that came. It was amazing. But anyway, the point is that I had one woman who messaged me, and she said, I have no job, no money, no anything, and my credit cards are maxed, and I can't believe you're charging for this. Well, the thing is, if you came free, right, it was free. But if you wanted to purchase all of it later, it was $17. I mean, it was ridiculously cheap. I mean, some people don't have $17, but I said to her, why didn't you come to the free one? Crickets. So the thing is, she didn't want the free one. She wanted to fight with me about me charging. So there were some issues in my life that I attracted around money because of my father's issues with money. Now think about this. He was pulled out of a very wealthy home and put into an orphanage. That's got to mess with you. Let's go back to Ted Bundy for a minute. So when we look, and now this becomes important because these are things that I feel that are just, this is where, and you guys have heard me say this is where I feel sometimes just putting a label on something, we miss the point of what's really going on. Because yes, of course, all right, let's name them all. You know, what could he possibly be? Bipolar, antisocial, you know, the narcissistic. All of that is true. And the reason I tend to stay away from it is because there are stitches that we weave into a life that have an outcome. And while the outcome is something everybody wants to know, we often have to back up and look at what started shooting off in those directions. Now let's look at it this way. And I hate to draw the association between Ted Bundy and my father. They were nothing alike. But I can see the huge abandonment and the feeling of being really being taken away from the only family you knew. So Ted Bundy was taken at the very young age from the only family he ever knew, by his sister, right? So why would his sister want to take him? Because according to him, he did not know when he was little that his sister was in fact his mother. So he has this rage at his sister. Now, check this out. He knew his sister, his mother, from the time she was unwed, from the time, well, he was born, like 19-ish, till 24 in those, and what were the ages of the women he was killing? He was killing the women who were in that age range, who took him from what he knew into a lesser situation. Now, why, right? Think about this. I don't know about you, but I would be like, why am I doing this? You know, why are you doing this to me, right? So now he has this imprinting. Let's go to imprinting for a moment. The imprinting of the very abusive grandfather, the idea that he just planted knives around his aunt's, like literally she was sleeping in bed and he just took kitchen knives and put them around her. And she mentioned at the time, wow, that was creepy. So now we have this 3-year-old who is imprinted by a madman who is extremely violent And he's extremely abusive, completely verbally abused, and beat the crap out of Ted and his mother. And what happens to someone who's abused like that? They get desensitized. He was desensitized from the time he was a toddler. So by the time his mother gets him out of there, he hated her because he was trained to hate her, because he associated the love that he got from his father with abuse, the beatings. You know, I can't tell you how many people when I've done a lot of when we've done a lot of the spiritual work, how many people, you know, have associated the idea of abuse and love, where they put it together. So he has associated this imprint of beating and abuse and total hate as love. Now, we are totally, right? So yeah, it's like, exactly. I just want to say, you're right, Michelle. So Uncle Sam is yeah, exactly. Okay, so what we've done here, I'm just seeing, because I thought somebody said something about it. Sorry about the picture, you guys. It's just internet. I gotta get, like, I'm gonna buy my own internet. I'm gonna create my own company. Okay, so now let's look at this imprinting that we've put together so far. We have the little boy who is with the father, grandfather, and he adores him. There are actually pictures of little Ted at the beach at 2 and 3 years old with his grandfather, who they are identical. And when you take a picture of the grandfather at Ted's age and you hold Ted up, it's like they're identical twins. So the abuse, the creepiness, the anger and rage went right through the mother into her son. Now, another piece of this is the grandmother. See, that grandmother, she was agoraphobic. She never left the house. She had nowhere to go. Think about that. She's trapped. And yet the grandfather beat her and abused her. And what did little Ted see? No matter what, a woman won't leave you if you beat her. And what did Bundy say? What did Dahmer say? Once you kill someone, they never leave you. I mean, when you start to look at it that way, it really begins to, you know, it really begins to come together where you're going, holy crapola. And you could see all of the different elements that he witnessed love as being, you know, being taken to the beach by a father, not knowing it was his father, just thinking he adored his grandfather. Then the only people that were that role for him, he's taken away with by a woman who's his sister. Why is his sister taking him? So what we're seeing is that Ted, even though it's hard to see in this moment, as Ted started to grow up, and at 8, 9, 10, 11, and by the way, he was beating kids. They said that he would take kids into the woods, strip them naked, and beat them. Now, how does a 9-year-old know how to do that? So you can see that his rage, right, from his grandfather, he was able to act out on other unsuspecting children. So he's already getting that pleasure, because what happens when someone gets beaten and they're told that it's love? They experience it that way. So he is getting immense pleasure from beating and torturing these kids who are like, you know, they ran from him, right? So when we begin to see how, and by the way, he was destroyed the day he was born. And the only possible thing that could have happened, right, is that he was given away to some family that, you know, probably would have been unsuspecting, and he probably would have developed some of these problems anyway. So what I'm saying is that I believe with Ted Bundy, we saw a perfect storm. We saw the result of all of the things that can go wrong in a little boy's life. And remember that had he been taken away and his grandfather didn't beat him, like my father was taken away. He resented his mother. But Ted, and my father was never beaten by those lovely people that took him in. But Ted was beaten. He witnessed a grandmother who was beaten and abused, sometimes to the point of being unconscious, okay? So when we look at that severity, and the reason I'm telling you this whole story is because now we can begin to put together the idea, because somebody said to me, why? I said, I think the thing is that the answer isn't really, sometimes, okay, put this in the right way. Sometimes when we're using our logical mind, we will never know why, because knowing why becomes the booby prize. Knowing why becomes, well, because he was a madman. And we know that. That's given. I'm not going to take that away. But what I'm saying is that we now can see all of the little pieces that fell into place that helped create who Ted Bundy was and the rampages he went on. You see, being taken at such a young age from that grandfather, he had to, think about this, become the man of the family, the man that his mother ultimately married. And by the way, when his mother took him away, she changed her last name. So it wasn't even, I think it was Cowan, it wasn't even the same last name. And then she meets Johnny Bundy, who was that short order cook. And Ted was horrified by this. He would tell anyone who would listen that this man was not his father, he was a loser, and he was beneath Ted. He was unintelligent and stupid. And so what happens in Ted's mind, he makes up and fills in the blanks from what he doesn't know about his grandfather. So you can imagine by the time he actually finds out that his grandfather was his father, and the rage at his mother from removing him, and recognizing that his mother was his sister, was his mother, right? One of the things that comes forward to me is I do wonder if he tortured his own mother in any way. I can't help but think that there was some strange seduction there. I don't know. Of course, there's no proof of it, but I really believe that what we witnessed ultimately with Ted Bundy decapitating people, having sex with their heads, just the outrageous, disgusting abuse, it was all to top the abuse he got. Because remember, the abuse that a child feels, and think about it this way. A child feels abuse, not like we can get slugged and we experience abuse. A child gets slugged, and that can be 27 million times bigger because they're little. I just said little. Because they're tiny, and they experience that as this must mean something I've done. And also think about it. How many law schools did Ted go to? I think he went to 3. Actually, and he couldn't handle it. He couldn't stay there. So what I'm saying about Ted Bundy, and this is what I wanted to share with you tonight, is that at the end of the day, I feel that it is very important that we look, because we've been talking about this. My summation of this is really looking at who we are, right? Not because we're going to be a Ted Bundy, but because those same tortures live within all of us on some level. Not the same exact. I mean, all of us have those fears or deep, dark secrets. Or I remember I was 15, my dad, God bless him, sent me to therapy, right? And I sat with the therapist and I said, I think I'm insane. And the therapist said, it's pretty rare, Tori, that an insane person would come in and think they're insane. I was like, oh. She said, so you're probably not. And I was like, oh. And, but you see, think about this. I had that validation that I wasn't. He never did. He just had consistent, and that's another thing. He saw himself as a loner, and he was actually, according to people who knew him in school, said he was a middle-sized fish in a small pond, and everybody knew Ted. Everybody liked him. He said no one noticed him. So what that shows us, all right, is the discrepancy between how we see ourselves and how others perceive us. And I think when we look at that, and this goes to what I believe is important around true crime, is that for me, we know Ted Bundy's a monster. We know that, like, disgusting. But later, I'm going to talk, not tonight, but in another video, I am going to talk about Dahmer. And one of the things that I think is very interesting, that was very repetitive in each one, is that each one of them said that once you kill somebody, they stay with you forever. And Ted would go back to that forest and relive their connection. So you see, the abuse was related to connection. And that's where, for me, I can't help but think that what we're doing and what's happening in our society today is definitely related to the types of crimes we're seeing, and we're not as aware of it. You see, it's very easy for us to say, well, we can look at this now, right? Because we went through Bradshaw and the Family and alcoholism and adult children of alcoholics, and learning about the different things that were happening in our lives in the 80s and 90s. So we did a lot of, if you will, self-discovery. And that's what I feel is very important here, is that in order for us to catch up and to get ahead of the curve, we actually have to be willing to go underneath what seems like a surface problem. And I don't mean this way, but I know there's always somebody who's offended, but the idea of, when we talk about a shooter in a school, right? There's a lot more going on there than gun control, or free guns, no guns, whatever. We know that things have to be put together. And we also know, and I want to say this, that the National Crime Database came after Bundy. And a lot of it too isn't necessarily hooked up the way it should be, even today. Now, I would defer that conversation to Duty Ron, but I think that for me, and by the way, for those of you that don't know, Duty, D-U-T-Y, Ron, R-O-N, is a dear friend. He is a retired detective. I do suggest you go over and definitely, if you get a chance, sub to his channel, as well as subscribe to mine, hence the subscribe pillow. And by the way, for those of you that did like the cards that I had made up, remember I showed you, remember I showed you the cards from they're all on Zazzle. And you will find my store on Zazzle. It's Tori Hartman, I think it's 2020. And you'll see all the cards you can buy as greeting cards. They're really cool. That was my little commercial. I'm now back. Okay. So what I'm saying is that I think you said it. Hold on. I want to just see. Sensible Crime said average people are so much more aware of serial killers and crime now. I agree. And there is an entirely new, when I talked about in one of my videos, I said that this Watts guy is a new kind of killer. These guns, the mass shootings that we're seeing en masse, if you will, that's a new kind of criminal. And people are like, that's been going on for years. Well, yes, it has. However, we've never seen it up close like that. Even Ted Bundy, I had to dig to find some of these things, because I think that when we look at it, and I want to say I really agree with a lot of what you're saying, Sensible Crime, because I think you're spot on. Oh, I don't know what happened to you, Jessica. See, I'm missing this. Oh, let's see, my baby sister. Oh, okay. Aw. Jess, I'm gonna let's all send prayers and love to that Jessica's sister finds her way back. Most alcoholics don't. I'm gonna say that because it's a serious disease, and good for you for stepping up and having her kids for now. But it's a very serious disease. So let's see. Why are all the mass shooters young white boys? Okay, so Susan, that's a good question. One of the things that you want to look at here is something, and I'm not going to say what I think in this moment. Something is making these white boys angry, like angry. Now, I haven't thought it through enough, and I haven't vibed on it enough to kind of get a sense of it, but let's put it this way. I do think that when we find the root of it, no one will want to hear it. Because that's exactly what happened in the Bundy case. Think about this. Everybody knew Ted was torturing kids in the woods. Everyone knew he tied a cat to a clothesline and set it on fire. People knew the grandfather was abusing cats, and it was believed later that people knew that the grandfather was raping his own daughter. So, but you see, in the 1940s, everybody went, Nobody wanted to know. Nobody wanted to know. And so what you're looking at here is another nobody wants to know. And I really believe that, let's see. Right, Dawn, nobody said anything. This is the point. Nobody said anything. Nobody said anything. So what you want to look at is that, let's face it, in 1946, having a child out of wedlock was awful. But if you think about it even deeper, this woman's mother, okay, and I'm talking about Ted Bundy's mom, her mother was agoraphobic. She had to have been in that house. The daughter, Ted's mom, had to have been exposed to the father. I mean, this is all, what we're talking about now is people didn't talk about that stuff then. They didn't. We still don't a little bit today. But there's a lot of things that people want to blame someone else for that's creating this, as opposed to saying, wait a second, let it begin with me. Where am I contributing? And because everybody wants to blame the society when the reality is, and I love when people say this, oh, he had such great parents. Well, he might have had great parents, but what was going on with grandparents? Because you see, that grandparent is what shaped Ted Bundy. What's going on with other family members? We often say it only takes one good parent, right? You can be raised by a single mom and be a terrific kid. You can grow up to be a very well-adjusted adult. Conversely, you can be raised by a very sick mofo and grow up to be a killer. So I think we have to understand that while being raised is a part of it, it is the experiences that happen to us that we make meaning of during that time. And a lot of us don't realize what the things are that will enrage a child. What will enrage a young white boy? We have to look at that. And the thing is that it's, no matter how we look at it, all right, no matter how we look at it, it is going to feel like someone's being blamed. Like, for example, as I use Ted as an example, if anybody said that he became that because his father raped his mother in those days, they would have, no, not at all. Even the mother was completely in denial about her own son's guilt, even though women were testifying. This woman was saying, oh no, they're all lying. They're all lying. He would never do that. So what I'm trying to say is that what we know now, we can fill in and we can look at as, like the FBI profilers, but it's just like anything else. I'm going to share this with you, all right, because I think this is an important thing. I have on one of my websites has a shuffler. It's a card shuffler, right? Because you go in and you register and it shuffles the cards and you can pull a card. There was nothing that did that. When I was creating that, there was no code for that. So I had to seek it out and find someone who could do the code. And most coders were saying to me, that can't be done. And I go, well, but all I want to do is have this to talk to this. And they go, that can't be done. I go, okay, because I couldn't figure out how I was communicating it wrong, right? So I said, okay, so if it could be done, if it was possible for this to talk to this, what would you do? And they said, nothing, because you can't do it. And I said, okay, but if there was something that's missing, what's missing? And then they told me what was missing. They told me exactly what the code had to be to make it work. But you see, the way it was being presented, they couldn't see it because it was outside their frame of reference. So when we saw profilers for the first time and we saw them say, well, it's a young white male, he's this age, he's this, when we saw that, then we started to look at it and go, oh, like there is a profile for those people. However, I took the same site, I duplicated the technology. Now this is, by the way, 10 years later, okay? I duplicated the technology and I'm working on my new site and it's still not, 100%. I have somebody working on it. But the shuffler is the same shuffler, but it no longer works because it now has to deal with new technology and new ways of seeing things and new ways that all of those wires are going in. So as a result, that technology that was fantastic and awe-inspiring 10 years ago is now just a piece of code that doesn't work. So we can look almost at profiling as you have to constantly be updating the way you're looking at these criminals. And if we look at, for example, a Chris Watts, we can completely see why these people, the law enforcement people, were completely messed up and destroyed by their interaction with him. Because you see, the capacity to recognize this and to see crazy was very different. And so I think we have to look at what I kind of sense is that we are going to see, and we must see this, we must absolutely start to see a new level of profiler. We have to see a new profiler. We have to see, not that typically women do this, but we have to be able to see how family abuse and family dynamics can play into the psychopathy that a child grows up to be that person. Because I think one of the things that we've got to do is we've got to be able to look at what is that 9-year-old, 10, 15-year-old white boy who's picking up a gun, what is he seeing? How is he seeing the world? And that becomes important because you see, however he's seeing the world, what's happened is we've looked at it as a political statement. Oh, he's this or he's this. And we've got two sides of the political aisle claiming it's the other side. Instead of how is he seeing it, they're hell-bent on what it means to them. So until we really get, until we really get that we must have a way of accepting and acknowledging the true nature of how our brains work and getting away from the crap of saying, oh, you have this? Well, that's why I came out and said I have ADHD. That's why I admitted it. That's why I'm talking about it, because we are only as sick as our secrets. And we have become a nation that wants to look good rather than be good in this way. And I think the more we communicate with each other, the more we have this conversation, the more powerful it'll become. And I want to wrap with a story. I know you guys like stories, so just want to see if anybody, oh, Fran, good to see you. Exactly, Jessica, your mother wasn't a loving mom, but you broke the chain. And you can break the chain, by the way. It's not easy, but it can happen in an instant. Oh gosh, I have so many fabulous stories to tell you about working with people with the cards and stuff. Okay. Yeah, I agree with you, sensible crime. I think Watts was a success story in the investigation. I really do. I really, really do. And I think that's important. I forgot what I was saying, though, you guys. It's always the quiet ones. It's not always, because the funny thing is Bundy was very not quiet. He was, and that's funny, Kat, that you'd say Catwoman, because, I know my screen is just going wild. Will there come a time when family members will be found culpable because of their influence? Well, in some places that was instituted and it was thrown away. It was in the, gosh, I want to say I remember it a little bit in the 70s, where if a child misbehaved at school, in order for them to come back to school, the parent had to come with them and sit with them for the first 2 weeks. And then there were other places where if the child committed the crime, the parent did the time. So there were some interesting tests around that. Remember that, Jess? And I think that was going on at one time, but I think that people just, I think we've become, how can I put it? We've become a place that wants to be right at any cost. And I'm going to give you an example. So today, and you guys will probably see it because it was a dialogue with this guy on my, I think it was on my Cindy Watts video, one of them. Anyway, he came on and said that basically psychics were full of crap, and that, it was against the Bible, just things. And I look, he's entitled to his opinion, right? And he said this stuff. And my response was, I don't think so. I don't think that's right. And it was something about, was he the one that also said, I'm trying to remember, I think he might have said, yeah, I think he was the one who said that, no, it was a different one. They're all out there. But it was very interesting. So he said that. And I said, oh, okay. I said, my experience is different. I don't see them that way. But then again, I know different. Well, immediately, he jumped on that. And it was like a tome. The guy wrote like this much about, how it was the devil and it was all make-believe and making it up. And why don't we just do a reading now on the Watts case, because we all know how it'll turn out. And it was one of those things. And I just kind of said, why would I do a reading on that? I've refused to do a reading all along because it's invasive. I don't believe in doing a reading on someone who is dead that has relatives that are suffering. I just don't think I feel that's where I draw the line with integrity. It's not worth it to me. I mean, honestly, if I did a reading, I probably could have had 1 million views on it, but it wasn't worth it to me to do that. And I just don't believe it's right. I don't believe in reading a person that's not in the room with me. Now, had the family member come to me, I would have probably done something off camera with them, but that's different. The point is that he went on, and I said, my next response was basically to the effect of, well, that's okay, I just don't agree with you. And he said, how could you not agree with science? How could you not agree with all of these things? And he went on again, it was again a tome, really super long, about how all of this was just, proven to be quackery and all this kind of stuff. And I just said, okay. That was my final response, okay? Because here's the thing I've learned, and this goes back to what we're talking about with Ted Bundy and people being culpable and the society in general. This man was so bent on making me believe him that he forgot the idea that what he was doing was shaming, blaming, and trying to destroy me so that I would agree with him. Now, I don't know about you, but ain't nobody going to get me to believe them or agree with them who's shaming me. That boat sailed a long time ago, ladies and gentlemen, a long time ago. And the thing is that he's entitled to his opinion. I just was like, and it was funny because someone else said to me that I was defensive today, and I just went, no, not really. I don't feel that way, but this person interpreted it as that. And what's interesting about that is that when I said to this person, I think you really need to look at this dialogue again to see your part in it, she couldn't. Said, oh, you're just being defensive and you're throwing it at me and you're blaming me and you need to know who I am and I really like you. And I'm like, I like her too, but here's the thing. People will say that you're attacking them or being defensive when you hold a mirror up. Because it can appear to them as passive aggressive or defensive if that's how they're being. Remember, when you do the healthy side of a behavior and hold the mirror up to their defensiveness, and that's what they're accusing you of, they're going to turn around and go, you're being extremely defensive, and they're going to go into deeper and deeper and deeper upset. And the reason I'm sharing this is not because this person's a bad person. It's that people don't want to take responsibility for their part. And, responsibility, and I said, go look at this and look at it later and revisit this conversation. And it was a post, and I think sometimes we have to say that, I wasn't trying to be mean to the person. I was just stating that by saying that, because there was a couple dialogues by saying, I think one of the statements was that it was a PS actually, and it said, I will never, after this, it's the first time I've spoken up and I will never, ever speak up again. I will never post again or something like that. And I thought, what's that supposed to do to me? Like, what is that action? Like, I'm supposed to feel bad, right? And here's the thing. I'm not blaming that person because I'm not here. If you don't take it in, you don't have to work it out. So for me, I just didn't take it in. I just looked at it as, oh, that's interesting. Because you see, the truth is that it was, if you are in upset, and believe me, I've been there. And I can tell you when I'm passive aggressive. I'll go, that's passive aggressive. Or people like you guys sometimes have called me on stuff and said, you're being this way. And I was like, oh, yeah, I am. Because I don't do it perfectly. But I think you're going to find that the more we come out as who we are and the more we accept our foibles, the safer the world will become. And the less we blame other people for the world being the way it is, and instead look to our own tongues and our own pens and our own hatred, we're only adding to the issues. Just want to take a look and see what, and I don't get people going to channels they innately disagree with and criticizing the creator. Yeah, it's kind of, let's see. Yeah, Joanne just said others' approval isn't needed. I think there's another thing there, and I agree with you, by the way. Joanne talked about connecting with yourself. She had a great post here. I really think that you made a very good point. When you love yourself, people approval isn't everything. But there is, for me, it's not so much the idea of approval. It's the idea of, it ain't my shite. If you come in and you say to me, I know you didn't mean it like this, but being just schizophrenic is, I know you didn't mean it that way, but this is very serious and here's why. You're starting your own issue, and how we relate to the issue is the issue. It's not the issue itself. So one of the things I had hoped for with this particular person, because I think she's very bright, and is that we can look at how we goad people into angry conversations and how we contribute to the issues. So I'm hoping that makes a lot of sense. Let's say, not my monkey, not my circus. Dawn, stop it. I love it. Lynn sounds like the nuns at my school. My school, I was a lefty till the nuns used the ruler many, many times. Oh, left hand. Okay, got it. Yeah, I think that what we want to look at is that, and I really need to say that it's, let me see. Oh, yeah, yardstick. Okay. Yeah. So I think what we're looking at now is we live in an unprecedented time when people are willing to do shortcuts to mental health. And I think that's the key. They're willing to say that the real problem is someone else. And that's not the real problem. It never is. So, I think I'd like to close tonight with that idea of that it's about me, not about anything else. And I think what's funny is that people will draw a conclusion from something I say when I was simply stating what my experience was of that person. So I think it's interesting that, when someone feels that they want to make a point and it's kind of like a little bit attacky, then when you come back and say, I feel that you've attacked me, they're going to turn around and say, you know what? You're reacting to this in an inappropriate way. Really? Because I think you were trying to attack me and it's not my stuff, right? As Dawn says, not my monkey, not my circus. So speaking of which, everyone, I know I've spent a lot of time Lynn, yeah, Sandra, she agrees with you. So I think that what we want to look at here is that, again, it's really that I'm trying to, when someone says something, and I would hope that when you look at my response, if I have taken the time to respond to you, and I haven't just hit hide, bye-bye, that means I think you're worth the conversation. I think you're worth the conversation. And I think you're worth the conversation because if you don't learn it, someone else reading it might. And that goes back to my conversation remember that video I did a long time ago where I talked directly to Cindy Watts in the video. And part of that was that, people were like, she's never going to get it. And I said, it doesn't matter, you do. So the more we awaken, the more we become conscious in a new way. We're in a new era. You don't get to just I did consciousness in the 80s. You're not the 80s. You're not the same. Some of you weren't even born in the 80s, but So I'm going to ask you to share this with your friends. Please make sure you subscribe, you like, give it a thumbs up. It really does help. And I want to say that I'm going to continue to talk about a little bit about my quest with my mental health and the things I'm working on. It's more cognitive learning. So I think that's the bigger thing. Love you, Evie76, cutie pie. Reload your 70s consciousness. Amen, Tom. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so what I want to say is that the biggest thing that I want to say is that I do care about you as a community, and I want to really acknowledge you, because if you're here listening to this, if you have sat here and listened to this, something is rattling and resonating with you that tells me that there is a higher purpose to this entire thing that I'm doing. And even though, I'm certainly not making money from it, but the thing is that that's what's important, is that there is a connection here that we're enjoying. So I want to say that to all of you. And I know some of you, I just want to let you know that I have, what is it called? Such Cute Nails VIP. This is my Color Street on my Facebook page. And I'm going to be doing a live over there. I'm going to be doing a few more lives. It's called Such Cute Nails VIP. If you want to find out about it, definitely send me an email at suchcutenails@yahoo.com. If you can't find it, it's a private, it's a hidden page, and it's really just some of the women who are interested in this stuff, so I can talk about that a little bit more with y'all. So that said, lots of love. I'm so blessed that I get to connect with you on this tonight, and especially a case that is as disturbing as it was, to be able to go back and look at the family. Because if we did that today, think about this. Everybody blames you for blaming the family. How many people came out and said, oh, you shouldn't blame the mother? And I wasn't blaming her. I was talking about things that were done. But that's what makes it very hard to look at things today. Thumbs up, share with your friends, and remember, say what you mean what you say, but don't say it mean, and be kind to each other. Much love.